Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, coming to you from Ocean Park, Maine. This is Len Edgerly on August 14th, 2020, episode 628 of the Kindle Chronicles. My guest this week is going to be JoAnna Hunt, Manager Kindle Accessibility. She heads a cross-functional team that keeps improving the Kindle platform for customers with reading challenges. A very thoughtful woman, very committed to her work, so I hope you'll enjoy listening to her. We'll have some news stories. I've tried out the new PocketBook Color. Echo frames have come back with the lenses, but there's a tragedy involved I'll tell you about. And also, Amazon is looking to locate fulfillment centers in malls. Let's get started. First up in news, I want to tell you about a new e-reader that I've been trying out this week. It's called the PocketBook Color. I think I got this through the Good e-reader site because you can't actually get one of these e-readers in the U.S. They're available in different countries, Switzerland, China, maybe, I'm not sure, about 10 different countries. But I wanted to try it because it has color e-ink technology. It's just like a Paperwhite or other Kindle using e-ink, but it has this kind of faded color to it, which I have to say is, I knew it was going to look faded compared to an iPad and anything else, but it's even worse than I thought it was going to be. I'm very disappointed with the quality of the color. And it leaves me thinking that if, say, there's a new Kindle, the Super Oasis, the Oasis 7 or whatever it might be, with color e-ink, how much more would it be worth to get the color? $25? I don't know. I mean, I just think that the screen on the Paperwhite and the Oasis and even the basic Kindle is so bright for black and white reading, and the color shows up on the cover of a book, and I guess you could use it in a book, but it just doesn't really add that much. I mean, it's hard because you think, well, color is better than black and white, right? Well, when the color is as pale as it is on this PocketBook Color, I think it's not noticeably or appreciably or significantly better than what you get on the Paperwhite and the other Kindles. The other thing, just in playing around with this device, even the black and white pages on this are muted and in no way up to the quality of the Paperwhite. I was reading it on the beach with Darlene, and she had her Oasis, and the screen was just, it was sharper, it was more contrast and much better to read. And I wasn't able to even figure out how to buy a book I wanted. So there's some kind of a pretty thin PocketBook library, and I tried to highlight on it. It shows how much 12 years of innovation from Amazon on the Kindle has just put it in its own class of e-reader, that never mind the color aspect of it. Now, the one thing I'll say is that it's a light device. It's sort of a sleek device. It's rounded at the bottom. It has physical buttons for page forward, page back. So when you first pick it up, you think, well, no, this is a pretty slick-looking thing. But when I actually was reading a book on it, I was disappointed in it, and not just because the color was such a disappointment. The other tech news that I got my Echo frames back. Now, this is the day one product that you have to have an invitation to, and I got an invitation through Jim Jones, and I sent them off to my excellent eyeglass store in Denver, Optique, to put in my prescription lenses. It was quite a investment on my part, about $500 putting these lenses in. And when they arrived back today, I was very excited to try out these frames that have, Alexa on board. But then the tragedy hit. I had kept the cable that charges these frames. It's a USB on one end, and on the other end there's kind of a magnetic three-pronged or three-magnet clasp that connects the cable with the glasses, and I can't find it. I swore that I had put it on sort of the nest of wires by my bedside table where I charge up my iPhone and my watch and Wheeler the robot for the kids and my VR headset. I've got all these things that charge over there. And I thought when I sent these off to Denver, I said, well, I'm not going to send them the cable. They don't need the cable to install the lenses. But when I came back, I couldn't find the charging cable. Darlene helped me. We turned this bedroom just upside down. It's just... And when I went online to order a replacement for it, $14, good. Delivery in 4 to 6 months. So unless I find this cable or some other miraculous way of getting an Echo Frames charger comes my way, then I'm going to be waiting. It has 90% charge on it, probably 80% now, and that gave me time to test it, and I'm able to see through them, which was a much better experience than when they first arrived here. They're pretty cool. I was playing some music, and the music was coming to my head in stereo. I was able to ask when high tide was going to be, and I wasn't anywhere aware that there was Alexa available to me, but all I had to do was say, Alexa, when is high tide tomorrow? And I would hear the answer kind of magically in my head. It was also pretty good for phone calls. When I was calling the Alexa helpline to see if I could shake loose a cable, I was just talking to my eyeglasses. So I think this thing is really promising, and if I can wrestle up a cable somehow, that would be wonderful. But anyway, we'll see. That there must be some reason. I was trying to drop into, well, what am I meant to learn from this? And I don't know yet, but it's I'm so close to be able to try these things on bike rides and every other way. But it's going to have to be sometime in the future. Third news story, interesting story has been in the news that came out of a Wall Street Journal reporting. They had some sleuthing, quoting people familiar with the matter, as they put it. And apparently Amazon has been in talks with the biggest owner of malls in the U.S. About turning some of these malls, especially the JCPenney and Sears stores that are empty because they're in Chapter 11 protection in bankruptcy, into fulfillment centers, taking advantage of these vast properties that have infrastructure built in. There's water and sewer and electricity, and they were trending downward even before the pandemic, and now in many places they're just properties that have no economic value. And in that setting, Amazon has been talking with Simon Property Group, which owns 204 properties across the country, talking about the possibility of turning them into distribution hubs. I think this is interesting. I remember in business school 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whenever, how vibrant the retail sector is. And, there was the cycle of retail. And back in those days, the case studies that we were studying were about Sears, the brilliance of Sears and how they totally remade retailing. And then you had the malls putting pressure on the downtowns. And now here come the malls going through the cycle of retailing because of online purchasing. And Amazon, almost like a Shakespearean full circle drama to it, now comes back rescuing some of these mall owners by making the space productive again for fulfillment centers. I think that, however we get through the pandemic, at some point, if malls have become Amazon fulfillment centers, maybe it frees up a new renaissance for downtown areas. I'm thinking downtown Casper. The East Ridge Mall was really rough on the stores that were in this very pleasant downtown area of Casper, Wyoming, when Darlene and I lived there. And I'm sure the East Ridge Mall is, well, there was a Sears store there, and they have gone through the same trials of malls across the country. And I don't know if Amazon's looking at Casper, but, now maybe the cycle turns and these places where people can live downtown come back. It's interesting, and I think it backs up some of my hesitancy about, is the antitrust mechanism really suitable to weigh in on this fast-changing retail sector of the economy and think that it can somehow protect us from an entity like Amazon. I don't know. You have to move pretty fast to stay ahead of the retail sector, as we're seeing in this particular story of Amazon talking with Simon Properties about malls. For the first tech tip, I want to tell you about the reading ruler, and this is something you're going to hear in the interview with JoAnna Hunt. It's an accessibility tool, but you'll hear her say, it's of use to anybody. And I have it here on a book that I was able to find on my Kindle app on iPad. The book is The Unbreakable Boy, and it's by Scott Lorette. So where I found it was in opening up the book. I tapped on a page, and then I went to the AA icon at the top. This is where you would go if you're going to change the size of the font. And when you tap on it, you can change the font, you can change the layout, and then there's a tab that says More. And under that, you can turn the popular highlights on or off, show reading progress, and at the very top it says Reading Ruler. Add a colored ruler over text to help guide reading. And if you tap on that, you see you've got a chance to turn it on. And one thing that's kind of neat is it's got a variety of colors. It can be gray, blue, red, yellow, golden, purple, and green. And whichever color you tap, it's two horizontal lines that just form an area where, on the size type that I have here, there are three lines that are within the upper and the lower. I've got it green in this case. And then to read it, I'm just pushing the page up. It's set for continuous scrolling. It doesn't have pages. So I'm just pushing the text up, and I'm being able to focus on three lines of it as those three lines pass the two horizontal bars. So it's very simple, elegant design, and I can imagine that in many situations it would be a handy way to help read, especially if you've got distraction or other impediments to your reading. A drawback is I had to tap on quite a few books before I found one that had this. In the book description, if you see enhanced fonts, I believe it is, and then you'd have to see continuous scrolling. So, not all books have it, and it's not available on the Fire tablets yet. It's just available on the iOS devices. But a good example of the innovation going on from this accessibility team, which you'll hear more from in the interview with JoAnna Hunt. Second tech tip comes from listener Stephen Gold. He listens to news on Alexa, and he also listens to the Morning Journal. And he received a message from Amazon, an email, which he sent to me, and it said, "Dear Stephen Gold, as a news listener on Alexa, we are informing you of a change to your news experience. Now when you say play the news, you will access your news channel, long-form news content from a single news source like NPR, Fox News, CNN, ABC, and more. If you are still interested in accessing your flash briefing, just say play my flash briefing to your Alexa-enabled device to get started. To edit or customize your flash briefing, go to Settings and click Flash Briefing in the Alexa app." And it's signed from the Amazon Alexa team. Steve said that he says, "All I would add is that I'm hearing a lot of interesting stories from endless NPR that I would not get listening to my local NPR station on the hour on my car radio, or just playing the station via Alexa or Radio Garden." That's an app that I've talked about in the past. So it looks like what they're doing is separating out long-form news into what they call a news channel. It's a little disappointing to me because I like being able to just say, "Alexa, what's new?" and have my Morning Journal come up. It's the only thing I'm subscribing to, so that's what comes up. And on my devices, that's still the way it works. So this may be something that's being phased in, a certain number of listeners at a time. And not such a big problem for those of you who are listening to the flash briefing, the morning journal. You can just say, play my flash briefing, and you'll get to that. And then if you're also taking advantage of these long form news sources, there's just a slightly different command that you'll be saying. By the way, I had a difficult time this morning because when I had a good morning journal that I recorded out on the bench by the beach, and I was all excited to get it up. And just at the moment that I was putting it up onto the web, I got a message saying that it wasn't happening, and I just can't get past it. I've checked all day to see if I can update the morning journal for today, and there appears to be some kind of a flaw. I called tech support, and they put in an engineering ticket for it. The guy I usually hear from on the Blueprints team, I just haven't heard from, so I'm hoping maybe I'll wake up tomorrow and everything will be back to normal, but otherwise it's disappointing to not be able to share with you these morning journal entries that I like to create each day. Well, correction. I just listened to it on my mother's Amazon account, which I still keep going a year after her passing. That's the way I can hear what's on the broad network for Alexa, and today's item is up there. So even though I'm getting this error when I go to the edit page, somehow it got through, and anyway, it's a little baffling, but the good news is that today's morning journal entry is there, and it'll be up there until probably about 7 or 8 tomorrow morning when I get tomorrow's up. Time now for the interview. JoAnna Hunt worked for a decade at Blackboard, an education tech company based in Reston, Virginia. She joined Amazon in 2017 as Senior Product Manager for Accessibility on the Kindle team. Her current title is Manager of Kindle Accessibility at Amazon. I spoke with her by Skype on Tuesday, August 11th, and I began by asking what she had learned about accessibility during her years at Blackboard.
Oh, so many things. Blackboard was really where I started this whole journey. I guess back in about 2008, while I was at Blackboard, my manager came to me with this problem. She said, customers are asking us about this thing called accessibility, and we didn't really have a lot of knowledge about it at the time. I certainly didn't have a ton of knowledge about it at the time, but we needed to go figure it out. It was something that was becoming increasingly important to our customers. And so what I did then was actually just start talking to people, start talking to our customers and learning, what the heck is a screen reader? What is all of this assistive technology that people are talking about? And how do you code for it? How do you design for it? What do you need to think about when you're building technology products, when you're thinking about people with disabilities? And at the time, it was really something that I just thought of as a really interesting and complex technical problem. And those were problems I was really, really good at solving. So I got really excited about trying to just dive in and learn everything that I could. But then the universe intervened, and all of these really interesting things started to happen to me. My 4-year-old nephew was diagnosed with severe ADHD and an oppositional defiance disorder. He lived in a small town where they really didn't have the knowledge or experience or resources to understand the different ways that his brain worked and how that might impact his education. And a few months after that, I met this woman at a networking event who was a deaf lawyer at the Department of Labor in Washington, D.C., and she was seamlessly navigating a hearing world. But you would never actually know she was deaf because she had intentionally chosen not to learn ASL so that she could blend in and not stand out. She ended up becoming one of my closest friends, and I learned so much from her about the choices that she was being asked to make in order to be successful in a world that was not set up for her and the way that she needed to interact with the world. And then a little bit after that, I was in my rock climbing gym, and I met this guy who was a single-arm amputee. He'd been injured in Afghanistan and Iraq, and he became one of my most influential climbing instructors. And these 3 experiences really just opened up my eyes completely to how all of these normal, talented, wonderful, wonderful people were just being hit in the face every time they turned around by these seemingly artificial barriers to success that existed all around the world. And for me, it really just solidified that there was something here that needed to be changed. It wasn't just a complex technical problem. It was like this huge objective to try and equalize the playing field in technology. And after that, the idea of working in anything but accessibility and building inclusive experiences was just a non-starter for me. So I learned so much about the people that I interacted with on a regular basis and how they use technology, how we could build technology that was actually designed intentionally to remove some of these barriers and create that equality that was just lacking in so many different things at the time. And it really became something I was hugely invested in after that. It was this incredible experience.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people that I've talked with involved in accessibility issues have some personal experience that they've had to fight through themselves, and it doesn't sound like that was your path. You obviously close to home with your nephew and the people you met, but you sort of had your eyes open to the topic, not because it's something that you had struggled with personally, it sounds like. Right,
exactly. But just the fact that people had to struggle with that just blew my mind. It just seemed so not necessary. And I was in a position to do something about it. So I wanted to do that.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, then in 2017, you made a big move across the country. You took a job at Amazon as a senior product manager accessibility. I'm always interested when I talk to people in the Amazon team as to, the things they've done in the past and then that decision to join Amazon. It's always a very unique set of circumstances. But what were the big draws to you to make that decision, and maybe what some of the things you were worried about? It obviously turned out well, but what were you afraid? And maybe you were getting some advice from people saying, "Oh no, you don't want to do that. You've got a good gig here in the DC area." But
I certainly had that. I had a lot of people who were telling me, "Don't move to Seattle. It rains all the time. You want to stay in DC." But really, the opportunity was so crystal clear for me. I mean, when I was growing up, I grew up in that same small town. I talked about where my nephew lived. There weren't a lot of people my age who I really connected with. And so books and reading was just this fundamental freedom and escape for me. It gave me this opportunity to explore any new world I wanted, learn so many new ideas, and just sort of dig into this, as my mother would describe it, never-ending curiosity that I had about the entire world. And for me, I think reading is something that's just so fundamental to who we are as human beings and how we grow and we interact with the world. And it gives us this opportunity to think creatively, to imagine things to be a different way. And it really does actually impact how we are successful in our education, with our employment, how we have the right levels of economic stability in the world. And this idea that there are people anywhere in the world who can't get access to books or who find reading difficult when technology can just take away all of those barriers and limitations, that was astounding to me. It's another thing that just fundamentally needs to be fixed. And getting to be a part of doing that and mashing this personal passion that I had for books and reading with this professional passion that I had around creating inclusive experience, I never would have passed that up, even for the rain.
Well, was there some overlap in what you were doing at Blackboard that involved Amazon? I mean, what did you meet somebody at a conference? What was the precipitating event that led to you taking the job?
Technology, and in particular, accessibility is such a small world, even though it seems like this massive thing. And I'd had a couple of previous colleagues who had worked with me at Blackboard, who'd left years before I did, who were now working at Amazon, and happened to have a conversation with some folks at the Kindle team who were saying, hey, we're looking for somebody who has this knowledge and background in accessibility to come in and work with us and create this opportunity at Amazon. Do you know anyone? And she went, actually, I kind of know the perfect person. You might have a hard time convincing her to move, but I think she'd be great. And so that's just sort of how that came about.
That's neat. Well, and now you are manager of the Kindle Accessibility Engineering team. You've been doing that for about a year and a half. Am I right that this is a team of people that have other jobs, and there's sort of a matrix organization to this? They also are part of your team, but who's on that team, and what's sort of the strategy in how that team was put together?
Sure. So we actually have a cross-functional team of people who are 100% focused on working on accessibility for Kindle. So our team includes, product managers who envision kind of what is the opportunity and things that we have the ability to go and do something about. The engineers who actually go build that stuff. Our quality experts who help us make sure that it's working the way we want it to and that it's holding a high bar for our customers. And we have people who work in design fields to help us figure out how it should work, how do things sort of fit together. Every single person on our team is very passionate about building these experiences that delight customers with disabilities. A couple of weeks ago, I don't know if you saw it, but we published a blog on our Amazon Day One blog where we introduced and highlighted a few of our team members. So I want to tell you a little bit about two of them. Jamal, who is a guy who would call himself a bibliophile. He loves books just like me. He's a quality assurance engineer on our team. He's also blind, but he brings this unique perspective to all of our conversations that really helps us better understand the benefits of accessible reading for everybody. And then he makes sure that everything that we build is delightful and super easy to use for people who use assistive technology or otherwise have challenges interacting with more traditional technologies. Young-sun is an engineer on our team. She was actually the lead developer of our most recent feature release, the Reading Ruler. And she's worked all over the world. She's worked in the U.S. and in the U.K. and in South Korea. And when she joined our team, was relatively new to this idea of accessibility and innovation in the space of people with disabilities. But in the short time that she's worked with us, this last year and a half, she's become incredibly committed to building solutions that benefit everybody and really become a technical expert in that space. And so our whole team is dedicated to this work, and we cross over a lot of different disciplines to make that happen. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned benefits of accessible reading for everybody. That's an interesting concept. Yeah. Are you saying that if you you invent something that benefits a blind person, very often it also has a benefit for a sighted person? What's the thinking behind that?
Well, a lot of times that's very true. Let me give you a non-Kindle example for a second. Think about the inventions of things like curb cuts and sidewalks, right? Curb cuts and sidewalks were originally envisioned and created to help people who use wheelchairs navigate the city streets safely. They were a way to help people move around the city without needing to be in the middle of traffic, where otherwise they might tip over in their wheelchair trying to get onto or off of a sidewalk. And so they were created initially to make the city safe, to solve a problem that existed for somebody in a wheelchair. But today they're used by everybody, by cyclists, by moms pushing strollers, by people riding their like as I said, their bikes on the sidewalk, people pulling suitcases behind them. Even for people who aren't doing any of those things, we gravitate towards exiting the sidewalk on those curb cuts. They've become something that feels safer and fundamentally necessary for us to use a sidewalk safely. And you can do a lot of similar things with digital experiences and problems that you're looking to solve for accessibility. Captions in videos is a great example of that in the digital space. Captions, again, were originally envisioned to help people who are deaf understand the audio that's happening in any video content. But today we see more and more people who are using those captions to help learn a second language. People who are using them to study complex materials from university lectures that are posted online. Students can go back to them and have this multimodal experience of both hearing their instructor speak, but reading the words that are there as well. And it just helps solidify their learning. The same is true with features that we build in Kindle. The Reading Ruler, for example, is a great great example of that. Reading Ruler was intentionally designed to help people who have ADHD, dyslexia, or autism who might find it difficult to focus on a line of text. But there are lots of people who occasionally find it difficult to focus on a line of text. Maybe you've just been reading documents all day long and you're just tired and you need to get through this one document, and you need something to help you keep track of the line. Think about how many times you might have used your pen to drag along the line of a text to help keep you focused in that moment. You yourself might not have a disability, but that feature, the availability of something like that in your digital reading environment, is helpful in multiple situations.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the Reading Ruler. I tried to find a book that I could try it on my Kindle for iOS, and I don't think I was... It has to say that the book has got enhanced typography and, I think, continuous scrolling. But does that... It's sort of highlighting a line or more of text, and then is it moving down the page at the speed that it thinks I'm reading, or how does it actually work?
So if you're reading with continuous scrolling in Kindle and iOS, the ruler itself actually stays fixed in position. And because you can vertically scroll the text, you have this really comfortable natural motion of moving the text into position.
I see.
And one thing that was really interesting that we found when we were observing customers who are actually reading using the Reading Ruler is they used it in a couple of different ways. We had some customers who would read the text that was highlighted by those 4 colored lines with the Reading Ruler. But we had just as many who would actually use the ruler to mark a place on the page and read the text as it was moving above the ruler or below the ruler, and just create this visual marker that helped them focus. So that one really super simple solution opened the ability for lots of different ways of reading and creating focus. And then people can change the color of it and change the style of it so that if they have other challenges, like they want a smaller space to be highlighted, or they find gray really difficult to read, but green is something that actually relaxes their eyes and takes some of the visual stress off of them reading on a harsh LCD mobile screen sometimes can be really bright. They can do that. They can set everything up to be however they need to read.
Well, so I'm picturing, you get the continuous scrolling, so you're moving it. Does that mean that it would be a different kind of a challenge to put the Reading Ruler on one of the e-ink Kindles where you can't scroll? I don't think there's continuous scrolling on the e-ink Kindles yet, is there?
Today, no. The Kindle devices really only support page turn reading,
right?
And but you never know what's coming. Technology is always advancing and changing, and we really believe that no matter where you're reading, you should have access to all of these tools. And so there's lots of things coming in the future.
Yeah. When I talked to my cousin yesterday, who's blind, he's been blind from birth, and he and I were childhood friends. We've been friends for over 60 years. He lives in Austin, and I told him I was going to be talking with you. The thing that he reminded me of as a device is Alexa, and he says that he still downloads some books and then he gets them so he can read them with JAWS on his computer, the kind of really powerful software he uses to navigate his computer. But a lot of times he just buys a Kindle book and then he can just tell Alexa, read title of the book, and it remembers where he left off and all that. That strikes me as a really powerful alternative for someone who's blind or has other problems reading. How does that fit into your team's work and just the overall topic of accessibility for books?
Yeah, Alexa provides great support for people who are reading books. Honestly, just the fact that you can ask her to read a book opens so many doors for people with disabilities. It's just so simple. These voice-based experiences are great for people who are blind, like your cousin who you were talking about, but also for people who navigate life with paralysis or other motor or dexterity challenges. And
right.
It's so cool to be able to just ask her to read a book and listen to it, and then maybe switch to your computer there and have your computer remember in, Kindle for PC or on your iOS app where you were and pick back up and then later go back to Alexa. And this seamless experience is just sort of changing the way lots of people read. We're really just starting to scratch the surface with the kind of things that Alexa can support with reading books. My team is a separate team from the Alexa team. We don't build that technology directly, but all of the teams who work on Kindle infrastructures are all committed to all of these different diverse ways that people read, and my team engages with all of those teams, providing insight and guidance and kind of bringing that voice of the customer who has a disability into the room when they're talking about what kinds of things you want to be able to support in Alexa and how we might move things forward. And we just have such great partnerships with other teams across Kindle who are looking to just make reading easier.
Yeah, that's exciting. I was interested, I think in the blog post or somewhere I saw a reference to a Bluetooth refreshable Braille display. I asked Peter if I think he might have had some experience with that, but tell us how that works, and for someone who has vision problems, how that can be helpful.
Sure. So, refreshable Braille displays are, sort of a piece of external technology, like kind of like a keyboard. They're not really a keyboard, but they're kind of conceptually like a keyboard that connects to your computer or your phone or your tablet, usually via Bluetooth, but sometimes you can have wired connections between them as well. And what they do is they actually leverage some of the same underlying workings as something like JAWS, which you mentioned earlier, or other screen reader technologies that are used by people who are blind. And it can display all of that content, whether it's the application interface or the book content itself, in Braille on the device. And the Braille cells dynamically change as the reader moves from one line to the next line to the next line. And what this actually allows us to do is Braille books are not very common. They're not printed, right? That there's only a fraction of a percentage of books that are published and written every year ever make it to a Braille format. And most of those are created specialty on request through, the National Library Archives or other nonprofit organizations who support readers who are blind. And so because of the delay, readers who like to read in Braille are significantly behind in terms of new release access, right? Mm-hmm. Those versions are not created at the same time as the initial print books are created. But with Kindle, when you can pair your refreshable Braille display to, let's say, a Fire tablet or an iOS device or your Kindle for PC experience that can connect to that Braille hardware, that refreshable Braille display, all of a sudden, the 12 million screen reader supported books in the Kindle library are available to you in Braille. And so if you really like reading in Braille, if that's something that you're comfortable with and it gives you a break from always consuming audio content, suddenly you have this vast collection of books that you can read, where previously those numbers were really, really small.
So I've seen Peter's Braille books, and in the traditional format, it's like a thick paper and there's little holes that come up. I think it's like a 6 position grid. Do these Braille readers have little pins that come up, or how does the reader feel the configuration of the Braille symbol with the refreshable displays?
Yeah, most of them have these like little mechanical pins that are on, I'm not a hardware person, so I'm not going to describe them perfectly, but they have these little pins that raise and lower based on the dot configuration that's needed to represent either the letter or the word. Braille has, in most, I think, unified Braille coding today, there's a 6 or 8 dot pattern. That's used to represent things, and in some cases the pattern represents a single letter, in some cases it represents a concatenation of letters, or even in a few cases concatenations of symbols can be used to represent whole words. And so depending on the sophistication of the Braille display and the software that's available, let's say by Apple on their iOS devices, kind of impacts the way that those interfaces work with each other and how those Braille dots are shifted and changed as necessary. I don't know if you've watched your cousin read in Braille at all, but they read so quickly, and those dots are changing so quickly on those refreshable Braille displays. It's really quite a sight to see, and to just be able to support that kind of reading is amazing to me.
Well, I remember when we used to, as kids, we would end up spending some time on the coast in Maine at a cottage, and there was always an issue about when my mother and her sister were going to say it was lights out, you kids have got to go to bed, and I resented the fact that when lights were out, I couldn't do any reading, and Peter would have a Braille book under his pillow, and he would be reading along, and I thought, this is not fair, you know. But
now you need your backlit Kindle. You know?
That's right. I would be okay. They probably wouldn't spot that, but and he has this old, I think it's old now, but he's got this, it's almost like a typewriter, and he can print Braille himself. So if he has notes for a book club or something, and so is Braille still pretty robust as a way for reading, even though there are all these technologies that in some ways look like they might be have some advantages over Braille? Is it kind of a crude form that's fading a little in use?
Well, I certainly wouldn't call it a crude form. It's actually quite a beautiful way of interacting with the printed word, or with even thinking about embossed illustrations, or the way that people are using their sense of touch to understand information. But it is sort of declining in its prevalence. Part of that, in my research, is related to in a lot of ways, the integration of schools. 50 years ago, a lot of times students who were blind were put in special schools for the blind.
Yep. And
those special schools for the blind had dedicated instructors who could, who were focused on teaching you Braille. And today, most students are integrated into mainstream schools, but mainstream teachers don't have the special skill sets necessary to teach Braille. So instead, they lean a little bit more on screen reader or audio-based experiences to try to help the students consume the same content. So the prevalence of Braille instructors and the availability of those instructors to the students who might need them is challenging right today.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's becoming a little bit harder for people to learn, but people who are Braille readers, who are really invested in having learned Braille, really actually believe that there's a big difference in especially with children, their acquisition of fundamental literacy skills, because Braille can help you do things like spell and understand the different implications or meanings of words in a way that is more challenging in audio. I mean, think about all the words in the English language that sound the same but mean very different things.
Yeah, exactly. I noticed in some of the information that's come out recently that you're working with the National Federation of the Blind, and I've been doing this long enough that I recall back in 2012, the organization they organized a protest right at Amazon's headquarters, and about 70 people were there, according to one news article, and they had dogs and they had canes. It was a very effective bit of protest theater to have 70 blind people. I think most of them were blind there, and they were expressing concern about the Kindle platform at that time not being as accessible as they thought it should be, at a time when it was being used, I think, more in schools, especially with the WhisperCast technology. And then there was, I think, a lawsuit against Arizona State University. So that organization took a pretty tough stance 8 years ago. What can you say about the evolution toward what sounds like there haven't been any protests lately, and it sounds like it's a more cooperative relationship between Amazon and that particular group these days?
Yeah, the NFB is one of my favorite advocacy organizations for the blind community. They're so passionate about their membership and the needs of people who are blind, and creating these fundamentally equal and accessible experiences for everybody. And we've been so fortunate to be able to collaborate with them since early 2006. We really have made an incredible amount of progress together towards creating these really delightful reading experiences for both people who are fully blind and rely on things like Braille reading or screen reader access, but also for people with other types of vision impairments that might just need to increase or alter the text size or the style of content in some way. They've really been a great partner for us all the way through this journey, and we constantly learn from them. They provide us with such great insight and feedback, and that collaboration, I think, is something that's key to everything that we've been doing and will continue to do. It's something we're absolutely committed to.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Well, do they still challenge you and require or insist on things that are at this point impossible to do, or what's their role in? They're not part of Amazon. They've got a separate point of view, creative tension, and
Sure, of course they challenge us. They challenge us all the time. I love it. I love when they challenge us because what they're trying to do is make everything better. They're working really hard to make sure that we just understand it and that we're paying attention to it. But they're also incredibly reasonable partners. So when you can have a conversation with them about, how technology works and what it is that we need to accomplish in what order and how we're working towards this, and we can be very open and transparent with them about, what this industry is headed towards and how we can get there together. They're some of the best collaborators you can have.
Well, let's finish up. I'm always intrigued at people's work situations in the midst of the pandemic, and I read something that came out of Amazon about, I think it was the robot team, that they were actually working in their garages at home, and they had set up the ability to do things which they couldn't just do on Zoom. A lot of work can be done that way, but do you have things that you're doing as part of your accessibility team that require some hands-on work with hardware, and you set up a corner of your garage to be doing that while you're working at home?
Well, we're actually quite fortunate that a whole lot of our work relies on technologies that are already embedded into things like our phones and tablets and laptops, right? Most modern devices have the assistive technology built right into them, or it's easily acquirable, right? It's a downloadable software package, or it's an easily purchased piece of equipment that we can use. So I don't know that we would say we have like a whole garage full of hardware or something at home that we're working with, but we've certainly had to get creative with the way that we communicate with each other and the way that we interact with the technologies that we do have, and especially the way that we share those technologies amongst us as a team to make sure that we all have what we need to do. But I think the most interesting thing about this whole quarantine and lockdown that everybody around the country has been dealing with is how much emphasis it really can put on accessibility, right? Everybody is suddenly needing to figure out different ways of working, different ways of interacting with things that they took for granted, and really highlighting, the challenges that can exist when you're trying to have a voice-only conversation. What if somebody on your phone call is deaf? Yeah. You need to have some ability to have video content so that they can see the expressions on your face and really follow the nuances of the conversation. But then the flip side of that is, what about if somebody on your team is blind and you're using your facial expressions or your gestures, like waving in the video to try to get somebody's attention? It's creating this environment where we're all becoming more and more aware of just how much we can learn from people with disabilities and how they interact with technology. But the other thing for me that I find really exciting about this time is actually that so many companies are realizing that it is possible to be highly productive in remote working situations. And what that does for people with disabilities is it actually opens the doors to employment opportunities that they may not have had before if they didn't have the ability to travel into an office, right? Where they needed to be at home. And now this idea that it is possible is just sort of it's an interesting silver lining to some of the work from home situations we're all dealing with, in my opinion.
That's interesting. It really just sort of reshuffles the deck about things that we thought we had understood, like what does it mean to have a job and where do you work, and as you say, what does it mean to work with people who have accessibility issues? So, intriguing.
Yeah, exactly.
You've been at this 20 years or so. If you fast forward to perhaps toward the end of your career, retirement, another 20 years, do you have any kind of a vision or maybe it would just be a hope as to how the projects that you work on, the challenges that you face, would be being addressed in 20 years if this rate of progress continues? Really just no difference in the ability of anyone to read and work. What would it look like?
Yeah, when I get asked that question, my answer is usually my 20-year career objective is to have worked myself out of a job. I really don't think that a specialized focus on accessibility is something that should be required, right? The ability for people to use technology the way they want to use technology, their ability to access all of these different things and different experiences that we're creating as we evolve as a society is fundamental. And when we can actually start thinking about everybody, when we can actually start realizing the benefits of focusing on designing and developing for people who might traditionally have lived on what we could call the extremes or the edges of our experiences, when we're thinking about them on a daily basis and we're understanding the specialized needs that they have, and we're creating products that address those things, we go back to that curb cuts example where we end up creating experiences that work for everybody. And if that is the norm, there's no need for a job like mine. There's no need for people who are working specifically focused on trying to draw attention to and raise awareness around accessibility, because it is just what happens. It's just how everybody builds technology. And that's what I see for the future. I see the more we're increasing knowledge and awareness now, the more focus this will have in, design schools who are teaching people how to build and design products for everybody. The more it will be included in engineering schools, where people are taught that this is just a marker of high quality code and high quality development, and it's not something separate anymore. And that's sort of where I want to see the world go related to accessibility. I think that will mean I've done great work in the next 20 years.
Well said. I have been speaking with JoAnna Hunt, manager of Kindle accessibility at Amazon. Thanks very much, JoAnna.
Thanks so much for having me, Lynn.
That's it for this week. Next week's guest will be Porter Anderson, editor-in-chief of the excellent book industry site Publishing Perspectives. He has been following the pandemic's effect on digital adoption among book readers, among other trends of interest. Porter was last on the show 7 years ago, so I'm looking forward to catching up with him in this conversation. For TKC 630 on August 28th, I'm finally getting a little ahead of myself on my scheduling. I have scheduled a conversation with the co-founder of Rocketbook, Joe LeMay. That's an innovative note-taking platform that I've enjoyed using for the past several years, and I just added a little mini notebook. These are you write on it on paper that you can clear off with a damp cloth, and it gets sent up to the cloud in very tricky, clever ways. Just a very interesting product that they have expanded a lot. It's a Boston company, so this is kind of a Boston startup story, and I am looking forward to talking to Joe next week. Grandpa and D Camp, as we call it. Darlene gets called D by my young grandsons, Ryan and Jake, and they're going to be showing up tomorrow for another stay with us here at the cottage while their folks move. They're moving to a new home in Lexington, Massachusetts, and they were at the home today for the first time, and Rue sent a video of the boys on the doorstep as they're walking into the house, and And the young one says, "I love it." And Jake says, "Is Santa Claus going to be able to find us here?" And so a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old entering their new home for the first time was quite a remarkable sight. And so they'll be here to tell us all about it for the next 4 days or so. And then I'll take them back on, I think, Wednesday when they'll start living in their new home in Lexington. I've got the tablets charged up and the Angry Birds ready to play on that, and Wheeler the Robot. So Grandpa D-Camp is going to have lots of activities. Let the fun begin. Appreciate you listening to my show. Hope you have a great day. Bye.